You know what you're supposed to do. That's the thing that makes this so strange. You're not confused. You're not missing information. You've read the articles. You've watched the videos. You've made the lists. You know you should wake up earlier. You know you should work on the project. You know you should stop scrolling and start building. You know all of it. And yet here you are, at the end of another day that looked almost identical to yesterday, wondering why knowing never seems to turn into doing. And the worst part isn't the wasted time. The worst part is that you can see the version of yourself that actually does the things. You can picture that person clearly. They're not smarter than you. They don't have more hours. They're just moving, and you're standing still, watching them from inside your own head, wondering what's wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you, but something is happening to you. And until you understand what it actually is, not the motivational poster version, not the hustle culture version, but the real psychological mechanism, you are going to keep knowing and keep not doing. And this video is going to change that. Not because it's going to motivate you. Motivation is not the problem and it is not the solution. Because it's going to show you exactly what's running in the background every time you sit down to work and end up doing something else instead. My name is Nick. I've spent a long time studying why intelligent, capable, genuinely ambitious people stay stuck. Not people who don't care, people who care deeply and still can't move. Today we're going to name what's actually happening, show you what it costs in real terms, explain why the advice you've already tried keeps failing, and tell you what actually works instead. Stay with me, because the answer is not what you think it is. Let's start with a character, because the abstract is easy to dismiss and the specific is not. Meet Marcus. He's 29. He has a business idea he's been developing in his head for 2 years. It's not a bad idea, it's actually a good one. He's thought through the market, sketched the product, imagined the customers. He's consumed probably 400 hours of content about entrepreneurship, productivity, and building things. He has a full-time job he doesn't hate but doesn't love, a decent apartment, and about 3 hours every evening that belong entirely to him. In those 3 hours, Marcus has built nothing. Not because he's lazy in the conventional sense. He works hard at his job. He shows up on time. He hits his deadlines. He's considered a reliable person by everyone who knows him. But when 7 p.m. comes and the laptop is open and the idea is waiting, something happens. He checks his phone. He watches one video that becomes 6. He tells himself he'll start after dinner. After dinner he's tired. He tells himself the weekend will be different. The weekend is not different. And Marcus, who is genuinely talented and genuinely ambitious, is 29 years old and has spent 2 years building nothing except a more sophisticated understanding of why other people build things. Marcus is not broken. Marcus is caught in something specific. And the fact that he can describe it perfectly, the avoidance, the guilt, the cycle, and still can't stop it is not evidence of weakness. It's evidence that he's misdiagnosed the problem. Because you cannot fix what you have not correctly identified. So let's identify it correctly. Here is what most people think the problem is. Laziness, lack of motivation, weak willpower, poor discipline. These are the diagnoses that the self-help industry is built on. And they lead directly to the solutions that don't work: motivational content, accountability partners, vision boards, productivity systems, morning routines. None of those things are useless. But none of them are solving the actual problem. Because the actual problem is not a character flaw. It's a neurological pattern. And neurological patterns don't respond to inspiration. They respond to understanding and deliberate interruption. Here's what's actually happening. Your brain has one primary directive that overrides everything else. Minimize threat. Maximize reward. That's it. That's the whole operating system. Every decision your brain makes, every behavior it encourages or discourages, is filtered through that single lens. And here is where it gets complicated for someone like Marcus, for someone like you. When Marcus thinks about working on his business, his brain does not see opportunity. It sees threat. It sees effort, which means discomfort. It sees uncertainty, which means possible failure. It sees the gap between where he is and where he wants to be, which means a long road with no guaranteed destination. And his brain, which is ancient and was designed for survival not ambition, registers all of that as danger. Not physical danger, but neurologically, the signal is similar enough that the response is the same. So his brain offers him a solution. Not the phone exactly, the relief the phone provides. The dopamine hit of the scroll. The low-effort stimulation that tells his nervous system everything is fine right now. His brain is not sabotaging him. His brain is protecting him. The problem is that his brain's definition of protection, avoid the uncomfortable thing, is directly opposed to his ambition's definition of progress, do the uncomfortable thing consistently. And here is the part that matters most. Every time Marcus picks up the phone instead of opening the project file, his brain logs a data point. Avoiding the work made me feel better. And it updates its model accordingly. The next time the work feels threatening, the avoidance impulse comes faster and stronger. Because his brain has now confirmed, through repeated experience, that this is the correct response. This is not a willpower problem. This is a learning problem. Marcus's brain has learned the wrong thing. And it learned it through repetition, which means the only way to unlearn it is also repetition, of a different choice. But before we get to that, we need to talk about the second layer. Because the neurological piece is just the foundation. On top of it, most people have built a psychological structure that makes the problem significantly worse. And it has a name. Perfectionism. Not the kind people brag about in job interviews. The real kind. The kind that looks nothing like high standards and everything like paralysis. Marcus has a vision of what his business should look like when it's done. It's vivid and specific and genuinely impressive. And because that vision is so clear, anything he actually produces right now, the rough draft, the imperfect prototype, the messy first version, feels like a failure by comparison. So he doesn't produce it. He waits. He refines the vision. He researches more. He gets more ready. And he tells himself that he's not avoiding, he's preparing. He's not scared, he's being thorough. But here's what perfectionism actually is at the neurological level. It is your brain's most sophisticated avoidance strategy. It takes the threat minimization impulse and gives it a costume that looks like conscientiousness. Because if you never start, you can never fail. And if you never fail, you never have to confront the possibility that the idea you've been protecting for 2 years might not work. The fantasy stays intact, the ego stays protected, and another year passes. Research out of York University found that chronic perfectionists report significantly higher levels of procrastination than non-perfectionists, not lower. The people most obsessed with doing things right are statistically the least likely to do them at all. Because perfectionism and action are not compatible. You cannot execute and perfect simultaneously. You have to choose which one goes first. And the correct answer, the only answer that has ever produced anything, is execution first. Refinement is what you do after you have something to refine. Marcus knows this. He's heard it before. He's nodded along to it in other videos. And he still hasn't started. Which brings us to the third layer. And this one is the most important. It's the gap between intellectual understanding and behavioral change. And closing that gap is the actual problem. Not motivation, not information, the translation of knowing into doing. Here's why that gap exists. Your brain processes information and your brain generates behavior. But these are not the same system. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain doing the reading, the listening, the understanding, is capable of absorbing the logic of any argument. It understands compound interest. It understands that starting imperfectly is better than not starting. It understands that the phone is a distraction and the project is the priority. Intellectually, your brain is completely on board. But behavior is not generated by the prefrontal cortex alone. Behavior is generated by the interaction between your prefrontal cortex and your limbic system, the emotional, instinctive, pattern-based part of your brain that does not care about logic. It cares about what happened last time. It cares about what felt safe and what felt threatening. It cares about learned patterns, and it is significantly more powerful than your conscious reasoning in the moment of decision. This is why Marcus can watch a video about taking action, feel genuinely inspired, close the video, open his laptop, and then check his phone. The inspiration hit the prefrontal cortex. The habit lives in the limbic system. And the limbic system wins almost every time in the short term because it's faster, older, and more deeply wired. You cannot think your way out of a behavioral pattern. You have to behave your way out of it. Now let's run the real cost of this, because abstract psychology is still too easy to hold at a distance. Marcus is 29. He has his idea. He has his 3 hours a night. If he continues the current pattern, consuming, planning, avoiding, consuming again, and does nothing with those 3 hours for the next 5 years, here's what that actually costs him. 3 hours a night, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year is 750 hours annually. Over 5 years, that's 3,750 hours. For context, research on skill acquisition suggests that 1,000 focused hours in a domain is sufficient to reach genuine competence. Marcus has 3,750 hours sitting in his evenings doing nothing except feeding an avoidance loop. If even half of those hours, 1,875, went toward building the thing he's been thinking about for 2 years, he would emerge at 34 not with a dream but with a business. Not a fantasy. A real thing that exists in the world. But here's the compounding reality that's harder to calculate. Every year Marcus spends in the avoidance loop, he also spends accumulating evidence that he is someone who doesn't follow through. His self-concept shifts, slowly and without announcement, from someone who hasn't started yet, to someone who doesn't start. And that identity shift is significantly harder to reverse than any skill gap. Because skills can be learned. Identity is what decides whether you try. So what actually works? Because this is where most content fails Marcus. It gives him the diagnosis and then hands him a vision board. That's not help. That's aesthetics. Here's what actually interrupts a neurological avoidance pattern. The first thing is the smallest possible action, taken immediately, before the brain has time to generate a threat response. Researchers at Harvard studied habit formation and found that the initiation of a behavior is the highest friction point, not the continuation of it. Once Marcus opens the project file and writes one sentence, his brain recalibrates. The threat turns out to be smaller than anticipated. The discomfort is manageable, and his brain logs a new data point. Doing the thing was survivable. That data point is the beginning of the rewire. But the action has to be genuinely small. Not work for an hour. Not make progress. One sentence, one line of code, one item on the list. Something so small that the threat response doesn't fully activate before the action is already done. This is not about being unambitious. It's about being smarter than your own nervous system. The second thing is environment design, and this is where Marcus's problem lives as much as anywhere. His phone is in the same room as his laptop. His notifications are on. His workspace is the same space where he watches television. His brain has been trained to associate that environment with low-effort consumption, not high-effort creation. And environment is one of the most powerful behavioral cues that exists. Studies from the University of Southern California found that habits are triggered by context as much as by intention. The same person in two different environments behaves like two different people. You are not going to out-discipline your environment. You are going to design it or it is going to control you. Marcus needs a separate space, even just a different chair, a different corner, that his brain comes to associate only with work. His phone needs to be in a different room, not silenced, gone, because silenced still means available, and available means the threat of temptation, and the threat of temptation is still a cognitive load that depletes the resources he needs for the actual work. The third thing is the identity reframe. And this one takes longer, but it matters more than either of the other two. Marcus currently thinks of himself as someone trying to become a builder. That framing, trying to become, keeps the identity in the future tense. It keeps it conditional. It makes every day a test he might fail. The shift that actually changes behavior is moving the identity into the present tense. Not, I'm trying to build something, but, I'm someone who works on this every day. Even if today's work is one sentence. Even if today's work is 15 minutes. The identity precedes the behavior, and the behavior reinforces the identity, and that loop, run in the correct direction, is the mechanism by which people actually change. This is not affirmations. This is not fake confidence. This is the documented psychological reality of how self-concept shapes behavior. In a landmark study by researchers at Stanford, participants who were primed to think of themselves as voters, not just people who vote, but voters, showed up at the polls at significantly higher rates than those primed to think of voting as an action. The identity preceded the behavior. The same principle applies here. Marcus doesn't need to become someone who builds. He needs to decide he already is someone who builds, and then take one action today that is consistent with that identity. And then one tomorrow. Not to prove it to anyone else. To prove it to his own nervous system, which is the only audience that controls his behavior. Here's the part nobody wants to hear but everyone needs to. You are going to feel the resistance every single time. Not just at the beginning. Every time. The people you admire who seem to move effortlessly through their work, they feel it too. The difference is not that they've eliminated the resistance. The difference is that they've stopped negotiating with it. They've accepted that the resistance is going to show up, and they've made the decision about what they do when it shows up in advance. Before the moment. Because in the moment, the limbic system is in charge and it will win the negotiation every time. The decision has to be made before the moment arrives. That means Marcus decides tonight, before tomorrow evening comes, that at 7 p.m. he will open the project file. Not think about opening it. Not feel motivated to open it. Open it. One sentence. Done. The decision is already made. There is no negotiation available at 7 p.m. because the negotiation already happened and it already has an outcome. This sounds rigid. It is rigid. That rigidity is not a limitation. It is the mechanism. Let me tell you how this ends for Marcus, because I think seeing both versions matters. In version 1, Marcus continues the current pattern. He learns more. He refines the idea. He gets older. He tells the story of the thing he was going to build with increasing sophistication and decreasing belief that it will ever happen. At 35, he's still technically not ruled it out. At 40, the idea has faded to the background, replaced by the accumulated weight of years of not starting. He is not a failure by conventional measures. He's fine. He has a job and a life and people who love him. But he knows. He knows what he didn't do with the 3 hours and the idea and the 2 years and then the 5 years and then the decade. And that knowledge sits in a specific place that nothing else quite reaches. In version 2, Marcus takes one action tonight. Not a big one. One sentence in the document. Tomorrow he takes another. His brain begins to update its model. The resistance is real but survivable. The identity starts to shift. By the end of 3 months he has something that exists, imperfect. Incomplete, but real. By the end of a year he has something he couldn't have imagined from inside the avoidance loop because the avoidance loop doesn't show you what's on the other side of it. At 34 he is not the same person. Not because he became someone new. Because he stopped preventing himself from being who he already was. The gap between those two versions of Marcus is not talent. It's not opportunity. It's not intelligence or luck or connections. It's one decision made correctly. One evening, before the resistance had time to show up and make its case. And then the same decision made again the next evening. And the one after that. You already know what you need to do. That was never the problem. The problem was that you thought knowing was supposed to feel like doing. It doesn't. The feeling never comes first. The doing comes first, and the feeling follows, sometimes slowly, sometimes reluctantly, but it follows. Every person who has ever built anything started before they felt ready. Not because they were braver than you. Because they understood that ready is not a feeling that precedes action. It's a feeling that results from it. You don't need more information. You don't need a better system. You don't need to find the right morning routine or the perfect productivity app or the video that finally makes it click. It clicked. You understood what's happening. You saw the mechanism. You saw the cost. You saw the two versions. Now close this video. Open the thing. Write one sentence. Make one call. Take one step that is so small it almost feels like it doesn't count. It counts. It counts more than every hour of content you've ever consumed about it. Because it is the first data point your brain gets that tells it the truth. That the work is survivable, that you are the kind of person who does the thing, and that the distance between knowing and doing is exactly one decision wide. That decision is available to you right now. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. Right now. Start there.